The following episode contains or may contain spoilers. So if you're spoiler sensitive, maybe beware.
Yeah, you sensitive people.
Get out.
No, get in.
Excelsior!
I'm recording.
Yay. Okay, I'm going to start the episode. Welcome to the Phantom Zone. 3 fans, 1 podcast, and a sea of comics. And we got Kayla back. Yay! Because the episode we're doing, she knows all about. First, I'm Noah.
Kayla.
And Jared. Jared.
Sorry, that came out really fast. You were like in the middle of a sentence and you were like, also our names. And I'm like, oh God, what is my name?
You can't just ask Kayla to say her name. She needs some time. She needs to say, she's got to center herself.
Well, I know I told you guys already, but I'm like totally embracing the Scottish culture of drinking beer all the time at night. So,
and doing heroin.
My slushy brain took a little bit of work there.
Oh, good. So today we are doing Marvel Phase 2. I was about to say Phase 3. We're not there yet. So we decided to do the second part to our kind of rewind review type thing of the Marvel movies. So Phase 2 started in 2015 or 13 to 15. So it only took 2 years, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Compared to the first phase, which was 2008 to 2012. So they started pumping out these movies much quicker. And so we got Iron Man 3, Thor the Dark World, Captain America the Winter Soldier, Guardians of the Galaxy, Avengers Age of Ultron, and Ant-Man. So we got a bunch of different movies in this one.
Yeah, I mean, the studio could do it because they had gotten better at making movies very clearly. But also, I think that they didn't have to establish each one as success. Before, they needed to do 3 or 4 and then the Avengers and see how they went, and then I think after it was just established that they knew what they were doing, they could just greenlight multiple films and start producing them at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think there was any hesitation left after the success of the Avengers movie.
Yeah.
No, and a few of these, most of these characters have already been established with the exception of, Guardians and Ant-Man, where they didn't have to do an origin story, so they could pump out these movies. And then you had the last Iron Man movie come out, so, which is, I guess, do you guys want to start with Iron Man?
Well, before we do, one thing I wanted to say was I think even though they absolutely knock it out of the park with Avengers, and they have this whole we're going to make all these individual origin stories and introduce massive audience to these characters, and then bring them all together for the first time ever in this sort of a kind of real cinematic universe. I don't think that the general public and critics and the industry is still completely sure that this is going to work in perpetuity. You know what I mean? It's okay, that original Avengers conceit paid off, but there's things that happen in what we're going to look at now that had still in other words, I don't think they had yet cemented themselves as the absolute cinematic phenom that they were going to be later on. Would you guys agree?
I feel like this phase solidified it, honestly.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I feel personally, I think this is probably one of my favorite phases. Mm-hmm. There's some stuff that happens in phase 3 that I love, Doctor Strange. But in this one, I feel, personally, I like most of the movies in this one. So,
Me too. I think a lot of them get a bad rap.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. I feel like this phase, it's either people really love the movies or don't like them. It's very one or the other.
I think they're still feeling themselves out, and I think that we'll sort of see it in an example in a second, but I think that there are big wins, but still some losses as well. I think some of the most kind of stuff happens in this phase. Not totally. I don't think any of these movies suck. but I think that and then the villain problem begins to emerge more clearly in this phase. I think we'll talk about it a little bit, but I think that the cinematic universe, comic book movies generally, but the Marvel Cinematic Universe began to have a stink of, outside of a few examples, they haven't produced good villains. Now again, that's oversold, but I do think that this is the phase where we see it a little bit more clearly.
That they didn't have good villains?
Yeah, and we can get to it individually, but and again, I'm not saying they didn't have good villains, but that they had as many kind of boring, forgettable villains. And again, it's not even so much that this is the claim that I'm making strongly, but that this was a very frequent criticism, and this is the phase that criticism began to take a certain kind of like
it's okay,
popularity.
You can just say Malekith.
Yeah, if it was only Malekith. Oh man, but there are some other ones. See, some of them are so boring you don't even remember that they sucked.
But yeah, I always forget. I mean, we could jump into Iron Man 3 because I always forget what happens in that one. So let's forget it exists.
But no, but you're right. Let's get into it. The first major, we're into phase 2. Take it away.
Okay, well then, challenge accepted. Because Tony Stark is my favorite character, and I will argue that, I don't know, this movie kind of functions a little bit separate from, I guess, the MC universe in general, but it is a very good movie to kind of follow Tony's personal, like, character growth and journey. Basically, there's been terrorist attacks happening throughout America, one in a Chinese theater. Tony's home is attacked. Turns out the Mandarin is behind it. But the main focus of the movie is kind of post-New York attack after Avengers. You see Iron Man or Tony Stark just kind of like really start to panic and trying to prepare for the worst, the cosmic villains and catastrophes that could possibly be out there. That obviously is a big focus in Ultron. So you see Tony with severe case of insomnia, post-traumatic stress disorder. He has a whole lot of anxiety, and he's dealing with that by building a whole bunch of different prototype Iron Man suits, the Iron Legion, to kind of come up with ways of defending the Earth just in case something like the Chitauri attack again. So basically you just see him kind of dealing with the universal ramifications of kind of just panicking. And you see character development with him, with Pepper, with Rhodey. I think that's the first time you actually see Iron Patriot's suit too.
Yeah.
Yes.
And like I said, it doesn't really tie in with any of the other characters per se, aside from ones in his personal ensemble, but it does tie in really strongly with where Tony's coming from in Age of Ultron and even beyond that into Civil War, things of that nature. One of the main things that people remember about Iron Man 3 is the Mandarin controversy, just because he is, I think he was personally hilarious. I think it was a fun twist.
Yeah,
but I know
fun
people
twist.
are like they pick and choose what they decide to really hold on to in terms of like comic canon and things you can or cannot change. So I know some people are really specific with how they want those villains portrayed, and Mandarin was one of them. People were pretty upset that the Mandarin was so different from his comic inspiration, his comic character in the movie. So
it wasn't even the Mandarin, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing.
No, exactly.
It was one of those. Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things where it's fine if you want to change the character, I guess, but for them to be like, "Oh, this is the Mandarin." Actually, this is an actor playing the Mandarin. It's not really the Mandarin. It's like,
whoa, that's so meta. That's so cool.
I thought it was hilarious.
It was
The
funny.
Mandarin isn't a character that I was really picky about, because I mean, like, the Mandarin isn't my favorite comic book villain. He wouldn't make the top 50. So, I mean, like, in my opinion, I'm there for Tony, and do what you want with the Mandarin, because I really...
I mean, I agree, and let's not forget the way that they dodged the potential racism of the Mandarin.
Yeah.
The history has had a kind of like the character has had a kind of like up and down history. Not that the Mandarin hasn't been made really cool in the comics; he certainly has. But I'm just saying, like, they did manage to avoid that problem.
Yeah, he was pretty cool in the Doctor Strange animated movie.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I think that's probably why I was a little irked by it because, I mean, Doctor Strange and Shang-Chi and stuff, they've all encountered the Mandarin. So I guess it really depends on how much you're exposed to it or what characters you like that are involved with him. So that's why I was like,
Exactly.
Well, the thing I want to agree with Kayla, that is played really well. It's really executed in the movie. It's a good twist, especially because away from what you know about the comics, we're just given this big setup that's like, it's the Mandarin, and I'm not a terrorist, I'm a teacher, or whatever the fuck he says. And then it's Aldrin Killian, or Aldrich Killian is the bad guy, and I think that was really cool. The only thing is that I think that this problem is you're gonna see it throughout some of their mistakes in this phase, is that it's not so much I think people were pissed that he's not what he's like in the comic. It's more like, oh, it was a big missed opportunity. In that, like, it's like, I do like this joke and I like this piece of writing, but I would have probably been willing to give it up for a badass Mandarin with the rings and the powers and the alien technology and stuff like that. But overall, yeah, I think it's strong. And I also wanted to agree with Kayla's point that the PTSD stuff, I think that was such a cool move for this to begin, that they're not just like, oh, the world exploded or almost did, back to superhero, and that Tony's really kind of fucked in the head about this stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like that's definitely not touched upon in hero anything, really. When really terrible things happen, when people die, when you can't stop it, people are normally like gloss over it. The next episode or the next season, you're like, I'm fine now. Who died?
Mm-hmm.
What happened? And again, this really informs Tony's character going forward. So in terms of Tony Stark fans, I think it's kind of like you have to watch this movie, you have to understand it, you have to like it to some extent. But in terms of like general Marvel fans, I understand that it's definitely not the strongest movie. But it is really important to Tony's character. So take that or leave that as you will.
I always thought for some reason I got the villains mixed up between Iron Man 2 and Iron Man 3. Whenever we did the first phase and you started talking about Iron Man 2, I was like, wait, that was the villain for this one? Who's the villain for number 3? I was like, oh, right, the explodey guy. Yeah, I forgot the explodey guy was the one in Iron Man 3. My bad.
Yeah, I think that's some of the problem with the villain here is like away from the Mandarin stuff, like Aldrich Killian is well acted by Guy Pearce, and by the way, I think this phase continues. Such good casting, such good acting. It's one of the lifebloods of this studio at this point. They don't seem to cast poorly, and they seem to get really good performances, because I think that Guy Pearce kills it in this. He's deeply threatening. Yeah. But in a comic sense, he's not very memorable. Some of it's character design. I mean, it's cool to see a glowy dude and everything like that, but he feels like a very generic glowy dude just in the way he looks. Second sort of complaint I have about this, just from a visual standpoint that I remember, is that it really makes the Iron Man suits feel very disposable and dispensable. That last set piece is super cool, but man, glowy arms are just cutting through what was once the greatest like technological, they're like ninjas or Green Lanterns or something at this point.
Hey, that's so fucked up. Green Lanterns are people, though.
No, they're great, but it's like that. There's this comic rule where it's like one kind of villain, like a ninja, is a badass, but if you get 50 ninjas, they all become like paper or whatever. They're just real easy to fuck up.
Yeah. Dumb.
Fair point.
Is that it?
Well, I mean, again, I'm repeating myself. I would just wrap up and say it's not as bad as what people are saying, in my opinion. But it's not one of those pivotal movies that you can't not see without understanding everything else in the Marvel Universe. But it's definitely a deep character study on Tony. So if you want to kind of get into his psychology going forward, it's a must watch. So just depends on how much you love Tony Stark, which I love him. So I will defend this movie to my death.
That's a good point. I feel like I didn't like Tony Stark until, like, I did. I liked him, but I didn't really like him until Age of Ultron. I think that's when I really started to like him. That is weird,
but all right. I'll take it.
Oh, I'm in.
He starts making bad decisions, and then Noah's like, yeah, he's a good guy now. I like him.
Whatever, guys. Okay. All right, so Thor: The Dark World is the next one. And I love this one. I don't know why I like this one. I mean, I know why I like this one, but I don't know why other people don't like this one.
Because it's the most like a DC movie.
Hey, one, don't insult DC. Two, Noah, are you serious? You don't have any inkling why people don't like this movie?
I mean, I know the things I don't like, but I mean, it can't be why other people don't like it.
Let's have Kayla have her say, because I'm actually with Noah on this. Not that I couldn't come up with some weaknesses. I've never fully understood the sort of if you the BuzzFeed cheap it's the worst thing ever or whatever. So hit us with the criticism.
All right. Well, let me start with what I liked, which was every scene with Frigga and every scene with Loki. I think those family moments, those strong bonds, ideal. 10 out of 10. That's why I love. Those are the parts of I think that I really even rewatch. I'm just like every scene with Loki and Frigga are perfect. And it kind of carries on with the family drama, the Shakespearean kind of aspect of the first Thor movie. I basically hated everything else. I don't think any of the parts with Earth really resonated. I can't even remember what happens on Earth, really. I barely remember Malekith, only because he was so two-dimensional. I mean, he was there to be an adversary, and that's basically it.
Yep.
I mean, it introduced one of the Infinity Stones, which is necessary, so yay. But also you could tell that, I mean, Natalie Portman was kind of checked out of the role at this point, so anything with Jane was hella boring.
Oh, by the way, that was my fault too. I kind of misdirected us. Noah, you want to explain the movie? Sorry about that. It's totally my fault. We just started getting into judgment, so I was like, let's talk about that. But Noah, if you, I didn't.
I mean, it's fine. I was gonna explain it as we went. I mean, the basis of this movie, kind of like what Kayla said, was it was introducing an Infinity Stone, which was the reality gem, or some gooey red stuff called the ether.
The ether.
Why did they decide to name them different things and also make them function differently aside from stones that do the thing they're supposed to do? We'll never fucking know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and it heavily involved Jane, which there was parts of it I liked, parts of it I didn't. I think the thing, and it involved his family a lot too. Like Kayla said, Frigga was in it quite a bit. Rest in peace. And Loki was in it quite a bit. And it dealt with this whole bringing Jane, because in our Thor deep dive we talked about when Jane was brought to Asgard and how Odin didn't agree with it, and he kind of felt the same way this time too. So I was glad they kept that. She's an outsider, she's from Midgard, why are you bringing this mortal here? You're above that. And then you have the whole Sif, Sif is right there. You would just naturally assume that Thor would go to Sif, but he loves Jane type of thing. And then you see, the band of warriors that are there. But yeah, I mean, the whole thing with this one, the main point of it was introducing a terrible interpretation of Malekith that I really hope they fix at some point, and then introducing the Infinity Stone. That's the main gist of this movie. So I think that the Reality Stone was handled poorly in this one. I don't understand why it was able to go into people, and I felt like that was written in just to have Jane in there more.
Yeah.
And to have a reason for her to be there. And Malekith was awful. It's nothing like Malekith in the comics at all. He wasn't even scary.
They just,
like Kayla said,
they didn't give him anything to do.
No. He was just there to be a foil for Thor when, I mean, really anybody, one of his henchmen could have done that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but all the moments I like were the same that, Kayla likes it, but makes me like this movie a lot.
This movie was the epitome of inappropriate humor at inappropriate moments that kind of drives me insane sometimes with Marvel movies. It introduced making hammy jokes right after something really serious or devastating happens.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say too, in the background, one of the things that they had a problem was, which is going to, I think, really plague this phase a bit, is these tensions between, Kevin Feige and the studio pushing for this broader narrative that they're trying to have, and this sort of business, and then the individual stories of writers and directors that work on these discrete movies, and that this movie had 3 directors at one point in its pre-production before they said, I can't remember the director's name. And I think all the parts that you guys are mentioning, there's like, why did they do this? It's like, well, like the ether and stuff like that. It's sort of like they're trying to deal with it being this launch pad for the rest of this larger story. And then that cuts into this, whatever other story they were trying to tell. And so it's like, I agree with Noah. There are really cool parts of this movie. I think they make some good decisions, but it feels like the movie's never a complete whole and is always kind of at odds with itself,
Yeah, there's one good half and one terrible half.
Yeah, it's pretty clear, and it doesn't help either that Chris Hemsworth himself told GQ, I remember this too because I kind of got upset, that he was like, the first one's good, the second one's meh. I'm like, why would you shit on your own movie? Don't do that. And so any article you read about Thor the Dark World, they quote that. And I'm like, okay, well, I mean, the whole thing's not bad. Just give it some credit. Come on.
Yeah, I
think
agree.
Actors are allowed to express their opinions, and it warns the audience about what they're getting into.
But
yeah, fine.
Well, he can say whatever he wants. It's not that. It's that the problem is that it's the same with Suicide Squad. It's the same with a bunch of stuff. It's sort of like there's always this third order critical opinion where you reach this kind of velocity, this terminal mass with a specific opinion, and then that's just the opinion that's out there, and it doesn't even have to be particularly accurate. Now, I'm not saying if people didn't like this movie, there are so many reasons, but I'm just saying there becomes this sort of knee-jerk kind of like, oh, it's bad. Why? Because that's the joke about it. It's like the Aquaman, don't you talk to fish of like critical opinions or something like that. And don't get me wrong, I mean, like, yeah, it's not the strongest sort of thing, but there's some real good parts in this movie and real good aspects. Like, so one thing is that, man, do they continue to, I think, productively work on the relationships. Loki and Thor, like, the reason third one is so good in a lot of ways is because they really flesh out their relationship in this one. You forget in the first one, not as much.
It was also interesting to see how Thor and just Loki in general acted after Avengers, after he tried to, destroy Earth, Midgard, the place that Thor holds so dear. So it was interesting to see how their relationship would grow from there and how it would progress. And I thought they did a really good job.
What percentage of the movie would you say is bad versus what percentage of the movie do you think is good?
I mean, so even I don't know. I mean, I guess I haven't really broken it up that way because it's more of like, okay, this 20 minutes is good. This next 10 minutes is bad. This 20 minutes is good. This next 30 minutes is bad. So it depends on what it's dealing with. So I agree that, yes, I love Jane as a character and what she means to Thor. Do I feel like she was needed in this movie? No, not this much. Like, she could have found where the ether was, and then that was the extent of it. But then for her to continuously be in it, I thought was a little too much. And then the Dark Elves were introduced, but you don't really get to know about them at all. And they're a huge part of, Thor's mythos. That's like introducing, I don't know, Mr. Freeze into a Batman movie, but not explaining him at all and not having anything about him, just having him show up, kind of shoot Batman and leave. Absolutely. And it was like, well, who was that? We're not going to tell you. It's like, well, why would you? So those moments were weird, but I think just generally I like the aesthetic. I thought the acting was really good, especially with Thor and Loki. So there's a lot of moments that I like more than ones that I'm just okay with letting slide.
And also, I think that's it's a good question, but it sort of like reveals that's not the problem with the movie. I would say 90% of the movie's good, 10% is bad. But the problem is it never gets, but listen, because I'm agreeing it's not great, is because it doesn't organize itself into a whole. So it's not, and I think that's the issue. It's not like there's this part, it's so awful. And that's actually the strength of this franchise, not Thor, but the larger Marvel universe, is that they mess stuff up, but it's never huge. To me, this is like this microcosm for the phase in a certain way. It's like there aren't any awful sins. There's not this part where you're like, like, oh my God, that's the worst thing, or like, that's so stupid. It's more like, well, I guess. And it just never comes in. I will say this is the anti-Wonder Woman to me, because the movie is not sterling or great. The last action scene, though, to me, kicks ass. And it's not just like, oh, it's really cool to watch. It has the conceit of them popping around everywhere, and the hammer is following them and stuff like that. And it had funny moments, but overall it was like, yeah, so I really like that part, at least. The action, the last Malekith Thor fight.
Yeah, I mean, that was cool. I think it's interesting. All the Thor movies are very different from one another. Mm-hmm. I think the first one and second one are the most alike, but then I think they depart from there, especially with the third one. They just continuously, I feel like they never really could get Thor right, or they kept trying. They're like, oh, people like him funny, let's make more funny stuff. But then that kept evolving into a different type of character, and then they lost the whole Shakespearean aspect of him. I felt like halfway through this movie, just that whole Shakespearean thing, even the way he talks, is just gone. Like, that's no more part of this character. And then you really see that later on in the movies after, like Age of Ultron, it's not there at all. And then Thor Ragnarok, it's definitely not there.
I don't know if, can you say that a little bit more? Because I don't know if I get that. Like, he definitely doesn't say thous and these, but he didn't do that in the beginning either.
Well, I mean, so it doesn't feel Shakespearean. It doesn't feel, because it's a space opera and stuff like that. I mean, it was really, but then with Thor Ragnarok and everything else, it was very contained. It was more funny. It was bright. It didn't seem like it had drama aspects of it that the other two, or that you would expect from a Thor story to have.
Yeah, it loses the Hamlet feeling for sure. Yeah, I see what you mean now. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's Thor. That's probably like one of my favorite ones in this phase. So we can move on to Kayla again with Captain America, Winter Soldier.
All right. Well, buckle up for I think is one of the best Marvel movies. It's definitely in my top 5. If you disagree, you're wrong. I'm sorry.
I disagree. I disagree, but it is good. It is very good. So
of course you do.
It's not my 5. It's not my top 5. That's it. But it's great. It's great.
But basically, quick summary of the movie. Again, it is kind of an isolated thing. I think it ties more closely to Civil War than Age of Ultron. But it's basically Steve Rogers trying to adjust to the modern world. He lives in Washington, D.C. And then S.H.I.E.L.D. colleagues start becoming under attack, and he and Black Widow, along with the newly introduced Falcon, future Captain America, kind of
spoilers.
Spoiler! Oh my god! If you don't know who he's going to become at this point, I'm sorry. But it also reintroduces Bucky, so there's a lot of callbacks to the first movie, which I thought was obviously very important. I don't know what it is that makes this so tight. It's like the best type of, I don't know, it's kind of like I wrote down a love letter to Captain America / Steve Rogers, because I feel like this story, the single movie, kind of just encapsulates everything that I love about that character and everything that character should be going forward, which again, I can't wait till phase 3 when I can talk about Civil War, because I have so many complicated feelings about Tony and Cap, because they was my favorite. But it does introduce Shannon Carter as well, which I'm less excited about. I don't think it has anything to do with casting. I just don't think that character felt really necessary in the movie. It wasn't really a standout moment. It felt very shoehorned in. It was, again, classic Marvel music, with like similar anthems from like the Avengers and the other Captain America movie, which can get a bit cheesy. Again, going forward, it doesn't really tie in very much with the Avengers movie at the end of this phase, but it definitely plays a big part in what happens in Civil War in terms of character drama. But I just think, again, that this is kind of just Steve Rogers / Captain America at his best, at his most patriotic in the best sense.
And patriotic in an interesting way, too. That's what's really cool about Captain America comics. He's never just like, oh, the United States is good. I mean, like, he has, there are political divisions, and Captain America has to figure out how do you be patriotic in, face of that. That's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. He's always patriotic, but he doesn't lean into like that whole like creepily nationalistic point of view. He's all about personal freedom, and I just feel like this movie really showcases the best parts of Steve.
Yeah, the reason why I like this one so much is because it's more of like a spy thriller than a superhero movie.
Yes.
Like, did you notice like this one had more hand-to-hand combat than like any of the other Marvel movies?
Oh,
there wasn't like
I know
a huge
the choreography for fighting is so good.
The action scenes are so tight.
Yeah, it wasn't big explosiony. It wasn't. It was very grounded. I mean, it's a political thriller. That's what this one really is.
Yeah, like Patriot Games or something.
Yeah, it stepped outside of the genre just enough, and especially for a Marvel movie, this being what, like the 7th one or so in the Marvel universe, and it stepped outside of it just a bit. And I think this is one of the only characters that we've been introduced so far, aside from Black Widow, but she obviously doesn't deserve her movie until she dies, that you could do this with. You know, Captain America was the perfect character or, you know, movie or property to do this with. I think that's why I like this one so much. And then, I mean, the whole storyline with Bucky, the whole thing just blew it out of the park. And then you get introduced, you know, to Anthony Mackie's character. And I mean, it's so good. It's so tight. The writing is just so well done in this one.
Go ahead. Just to add, like the stunts and the practical effects, awesome that they did that here, because when everybody's like, "Oh, these things are cool," but it's like all this CGI bullshit. It's just like, you know, too much like $3 billion like CGI fest, and then they come with this like out of Hollywood from the 70s like stunt like moving like practical effect thing. Super smart, I think.
Mm-hmm. I also really like his suit. Sorry, I was just going to say, I like Captain America's suit in this one, because I did not like his first suit, and I wasn't too big of a fan of the big silver zipper in the front, and I was so glad that they kind of toned it back, and it was very much more of an espionage movie, so he had a darker toned suit, it was very slick and kind of tight, and he didn't have a mask, like, the entire time.
Any look ever, but I do agree that Winter Soldier is probably his best look.
I'll say he looked dumb in Avengers.
Yeah, he's too bright.
It looked like cosplay, and I only say that because most of the time Captain America's suit looked like it was awesome. Like they fix it most of the time. But in that one, I was just like, man, this is a little too cosplay.
Yeah. ...
I agree. Anyway. What I was going to say, I think what also lended this movie to being super popular is never underestimate the fangirls, because if Tom Hiddleston's Loki treatment after the first Thor movie is akin to what happened with Sebastian Stan's Bucky after this one.
That's so true.
Right? I feel like Bucky fans just started coming out of the woodwork, and they were mostly women just who loved that character so much. Again, it just reminded me a lot of Loki, and I admit that I was one of those Loki girls. So.
Oh yeah, why did women love this? Like, oh, he's dark and mysterious, but turns out secretly he's a good guy. I can change him.
That's what it is. Loki and then Bucky.
But another thing Noah said that I think is just so right on and crucial to this phase, why it's so good, the genre hopping. This is a great example, and it's what Marvel starts to figure out real quick. Is like, oh, we are doing these superhero adaptations, but they don't all have to be like Superman. We can really translate them into these genres, and you're absolutely right. The spy action thriller espionage thing that this goes through, I think this is the movie. If not, it sort of opens the door for like, oh, look at all the genres we get to do within Marvel Comics.
Yeah, I think it was a good step forward. It was a good. I don't know if maybe they were testing it or they just knew that it was going to be good, but I thought they knocked this one out of the park. I love watching this. This is one of the only Marvel movies that I can watch multiple times and still enjoy it just as much. So, I mean, the choreography, like you guys said, it's so good. And Black Widow, Scarlett Johansson in this one is also very good in it. So, you know, I'm all for it.
Oh yeah, she kicks ass in this. Like when she fights the Winter Soldier, Even though she
yeah.
doesn't, like, he's like a super soldier and she's just a regular huge badass or whatever. She holds her own, and there's plenty of times where like, oh, she could kick his ass. Like, I really feel this.
Oh yeah. She could.
Last thing I gotta announce: they needed this. They needed this success. We forget this could have like crashed and burned. And the last two movies we talked about, they were getting sequelitis really bad. You know, it was sort of like, oh, they're good. They all, you know, over 50% on Rotten Tomatoes. They all turned a profit, but it was all looking pretty sequely. And this movie's the first one that they do in the second phase where it's like, oh no, they could be better. Like there's just a reinvigorated faith that like, oh, we're not done with these characters. We haven't seen the best moments. They could get better. So yeah, really cool.
Oh, that's a good point. It's like undisputedly better than the first movie.
No question.
Yeah, and this came out pretty much like hot on the heels of Man of Steel, which is a great movie, but it was very controversial and made people start questioning superhero movies and all that. So it was, I guess, an interesting palate cleanser for that as well.
I just love between the three, Iron Man's first movie is widely regarded as the best, Captain America's second movie, and then Thor's third movie.
Yeah.
That's just kind of cool. Okay.
So Guardians of the Galaxy, take it away, Jared.
Aha, yes. Okay. So you want to talk about a blockbuster hit for Marvel? This is the one, or at least this is the one that like they went from zero, like no one's heard of this property, to nearly $1 billion worldwide. It's actually like $770 million that this made. You guys probably listening all know the story, but basically Peter Quill, the Star-Lord, some like kind of nameless, sort of infamous something space pirate, is hired to find the MacGuffin that we're going to find out later on. They just call it the orb in this, but later on it's the power gem. So
Oh, you mean it's another Infinity Stone that's called something else and looks different than what a stone should look like?
But actually
weird.
Handled well in this one.
I guess.
I mean, anyway, so yeah. Anyway, so it's going to turn out to be the power gem, which is super important. But in the pursuit of that MacGuffin, Peter Quill is going to come, into contact with several, kind of like madcap, like a madcap menagerie of different like bounty hunters.
They're like near deer gooters.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and they're like pirates and bounty hunters and like female assassins or whatever it is. That's females who are assassins, not assassins of females. Anyway, and they're going to try to find the power gem. They're going to get imprisoned. They're going to escape from imprisonment, and they've got to stop Ronan the Accuser, the evil Kree zealot, from destroying Xandar and eventually the galaxy. So that's kind of the Guardians of the Galaxy story you all know and love. Like I said, so I think that it gets huge points for taking a concept that no one's heard of in general audiences at all, even obscure amongst comic fans. Honestly, it translates Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning's Guardians of the Galaxy, but really diverts from even that quite a bit. And then it just sort of just crushes it. I think that it's just so well executed. Sort of like the main things that need to go right in any movie are all just really well calibrated. So it's got equal parts humor and heart and drama and everything, a comedy. It's funny when it needs to be. It takes itself seriously when it can't be. And they crush it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, this movie had everything going for it. It's like the good Suicide Squad. Yeah. It's like what Suicide Squad could have been. Because you have these people that aren't necessarily heroes, but get thrown into this situation, and you have so many different personality types and also like alien species types that are in this. And one thing that I really appreciated they did with this movie and these properties is that they weren't afraid to actually do them like the comics. So you got Rocket as a raccoon. Now, it would be weird for Marvel to make a character that looked like a human named Rocket and it wasn't an actual raccoon.
Sure.
But I was just happy to see that they went real into it. They just dove right into it. They're like, look, this is going to be fucking weird. and you're just going to have to, watch it, and you're going to have to find out why this is great because it's weird. I like that they just went totally into it.
I think you're more right than almost. Like, because you definitely know you're right. But what's crazy is that the parts they divert from are the parts that you would think they wouldn't have. So the parts where they're almost the most accurate are with Groot and Rocket. The parts that you would have been, that conventional, also known as stupid, wisdom would have said, like, oh, you can't do that. It's too unrealistic, too silly. The parts that they change the most are the ones that are honestly the most conventional. So Gamora, Drax, and Peter Quill are really, it's not that they're so far off. They're visually correct, but they're, and sort of their basic powers. But if anything, Drax, as much as I love Dave Bautista's version of that character, he's in some sense like the biggest disappointment in that the Drax from the comics is just so badass. And Dave is, kind of physically intimidating, but really played more for laughs.
Yeah, for sure. This cast too, like I am a huge Chris Pratt fan, loving Parks and Rec, and then seeing Andy Dwyer become, a space pirate superhero was amazing for some reason. I'm like, yay, I'm so proud of him. This movie, it was just so good. It was, they mixed the whole retro aesthetic with it. They mixed Star Wars elements with it. You still got that superhero feel. You got more of, Thanos is lurking in the darkness type thing.
Yeah, he's introduced.
Because I think that was actually...
He's introduced in this. In a full
he was
form.
The post... Right, yeah. So, you see that, and then people are starting to see, Gamora's introduced, which she plays a huge, big, pivotal part to the ending of this entire cinematic, I guess, stint that they're doing, because she's the daughter of Thanos. So, this movie was much more important than I think a lot of people thought it would be.
Yeah.
And it's also interesting that this one and Ant-Man in this phase had nothing to do with the Avengers. They don't meet them. They're not. So it's really funny that they're just two separate movies happening in two separate parts that eventually will come together. I thought it was really smart for them to do that, not connect them right away.
Yeah, they open up their this other distant place that are in the same world, but that it's not an outgrowth of something else. And also this really opens up the cosmic Marvel world in a way that we hadn't really seen. So Asgard, is obviously it represents the larger universe and everything like that. But in another ways, because it's tied to the Norse pantheon, is also in and of itself kind of self-isolated, kind of like a pocket dimension almost, or something like that. Whereas, and so it doesn't feel infinitely expansive in a way that when Guardians opens up, the world building is huge. They go to so many places. They go to nowhere, which is this space station / planet / weird thing, which is just an old Celestial's head. So Celestials get introduced in this. The Collector is in this with Benicio del Toro's weird performance and everything like that.
I love him.
He's great. If anything, he was a bit underused. By the way, Kayla, how did you feel about Guardians? Because are you pretty on the Guardians wagon here?
Yeah, my relationship with Guardians of the Galaxy is that I find it it checks all of the things I think it takes to be a really good superhero movie, but nothing outstanding. So
sure.
Not a piece of humor in this I felt was out of place. I felt like it really suited the cast and the characters. So it didn't have any of those annoying, I'm rolling my eyes, Marvel, stop shoehorning humor everywhere. Because I feel like it was really appropriate. Obviously, the Chris Pratt treatment of Peter Quill was amazing. I really enjoy the found family tropes. The music was really fun. Again, it kind of expressed, it broke away from again, the typical Marvel music that you hear in Captain America or Avengers music or movies.
The big cinematic music.
Yeah, exactly. It really did what Iron Man does, where it obviously brought in its own playlist, which I thought worked really well. But in terms of overall impact on me personally, I guess another good thing was I think it did what Dark World was trying to do in terms of trying to, broaden the scope and connect the Infinity Stones, and kind of explore, kind of where they were going with the whole Endgame Infinity Wars aspect. I feel like even though Ronan, and I love Lee Pace, Ronan was pretty weak in this movie overall.
Yes,
the villains weren't that important. But I feel like the threat of Thanos in the distance and kind of I feel like that worked. Like it didn't bother me as much as it did in Dark World because of that looming threat that Thanos possessed, the Collector, and all of that insidious tension. Plus, they had so many characters that I felt like they couldn't really, I feel like the appropriate amount of time was spent on the villains versus all of the heroes that you're meeting for the first time and building relationships with.
Yeah, that's why nobody really complains about it.
Yeah, exactly. And that being said, I feel like there wasn't really a character or a relationship that I really latched onto as was fantastic, was great. I feel like everything overall in Guardians of the Galaxy was good. It hit everything it needed to. It was funny. It was entertaining. I love rewatching this movie, but I mean, I will go to my deathbed in love with Tony Stark and Captain America, whereas I probably won't give a passing thought to Peter Quill or Gamora or Drax, Rocket, Groot, etc. The only relationship I really find interesting in the Guardians movie is Peter and Yondu's relationship, and that's explored more in the second movie. So,
yeah. And just to briefly mention, outside of this fucking awesome, ensemble cast, there is some standout performances from what would otherwise just be side characters. Karen Gillan's Nebula is fantastic.
Oh my God, I love it.
Fantastic. There's a reason she becomes so much more important. I don't think that was planned. I think her breakout role here was just we got to use her more. Michael Rooker's Yondu he's almost ancillary to the plot. And it's that combination of Michael Rooker is such a badass and that cool arrow idea and that he is this sort of father character. Yeah, it works in a huge way. I could watch a Yondu Nebula movie.
Yeah, I could too. I mean, I love Nebula. I love what they did with her. I thought it was one of the few character changes that actually paid off. And because Nebula, I mean, she's in the comics and stuff, but it's Nebula. She's a space pirate as well. I mean, this really gave her personality and a purpose in this. And I'm a sucker for a good sibling, relationship, complicated or good. And so I thought it was really, I love pretty much this whole cast and their relationship with each other. I think it's great.
And one of the things that it was, I'm not saying bound to succeed, but it's easy to forget, relative to the Avengers, they really are way more free to screw around in a fun James Gunnian way, because they're pirates. They're, you know what I mean? They can be screw-ups. They can be dastardly. They can mess up. They can, do dishonorable things. They can get dirty because they're not trying to be superheroes. They live in that world. The
appeal of the anti-hero.
Absolutely. And again, the freedom. There's so many things Thor and Captain America and even Iron Man really can't do, nor should they do, because of their, they're superheroes and if not role models, it's this is the good guy. Whereas if Peter Quill tries to steal something or Rocket betrays his friends, well, that's just what pirates do. And it makes it, I think, really fun, and really jet setting in a way that we don't always get to see with superhero movies.
Yeah, I think this is the first one we all agree on. That's pretty good, aside from Winter Soldier. So I guess we're getting better. So speaking
crushed it
of Avengers. So Avengers Age of Ultron is the next one. It's the second Avengers movie. I like this one and also really don't like this one.
Me too. That's where
I'm conflicted. I feel like okay, who wants to explain this one? Because I feel like this one's a little odd to explain.
I can explain. Just briefly, the plot is we start and the Avengers are they're kind of cleaning up from the battle in New York. Specifically, Loki's scepter is out there, and we don't know at this point what it is, but I mean, the Avengers don't, but they know it's dangerous and bad. He was using it to take over minds, and the first one was wait, I got to get rid of it. But Hydra's out there, and they're trying to, they also are looking for the bad shit to fall out from the previous phase or whatever. So Baron Strucker and Hydra also use the power of that, what's later going to turn out the Mind Gem, to create Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. So we get introduced our first new Avengers. And then also what's going on is Tony and Bruce, once they recover the scepter, are concerned about creating a kind of robotic protective AI bubble because they're so concerned about the next invasion, and so they create accidentally Ultron. This what turns out to be like a hyper intelligent, evil robot mind.
It's like what all those like 70s and 80s movies feared. It's like technology is going to rule us. It's going to get too smart. That's essentially what this movie's about.
We no longer fear that because we've just given into it entirely. We're like, yeah,
it's
that's
like,
happening.
you can do this for me and I don't have, please, by all means, go do it. I don't care.
I worship Rumbas now. They are my god. But yeah, that's basically the Avengers have to come together to stop Ultron. Yeah.
So you mentioned that they introduced Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. Some of the biggest name characters, in Marvel, at least in the comics. Everybody knows these people. They're heavily tied to the X-Men because they are X-Men. They're not X-Men. They are mutants. They're not mutants. They're magic. They're not magic. Yeah. I mean, I forgot. So I rewatched this as well, and I forgot how much she fucks with people's minds in this one.
Yeah.
And she doesn't do that later on. Like, it's as if it doesn't exist. And now she's just this big powerhouse, energy projecting, telekinetic powerhouse. And I'm like, wait, I forgot she could do that.
Yeah, Joss
and
Whedon,
also,
Joss Whedon's a douchebag in this for doing that. Well, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I just think right off the bat, whenever you see that they were experiments, I was like, oh, so they're not planning on getting these X-Men in here at all. Like, as soon as he called them enhanced, I was like, oh man, okay, that's fine. I'm okay with this, I guess. And then I was just gonna say, and then when they kill Quicksilver, I was just like, okay, this movie's too problematic for me. I can't like.
Yeah, I probably would have enjoyed Scarlet Witch going forward if Quicksilver hadn't died, because I recently rewatched this movie too, and you guys know how I feel about Scarlet Witch. So I tried to go in with an open mind, but all I could think about is, what a fucking bitch the whole time. People give Tony Stark such shit going forward about why he behaves the way he does. I mean, you see in Iron Man 3 that he was already like super post-traumatic stress, anxiety, really worried about the lives of his friends and the future of the earth, and then she just like makes that problem a billion times worse, and people don't make her take responsibility for it. So while I think Ultron is I actually really enjoyed Age of Ultron in general. I like that movie. I don't know why it has such a bad rep, but the one thing I absolutely hated was Scarlet Witch and how no one seems to hold her accountable to what she did in that movie going forward.
I do feel like she held herself accountable a little bit. Like not enough, not nearly enough.
Tony Stark for no reason.
Yeah, but I mean, maybe they kind of gave her the benefit of the doubt because she did end up helping, and then she lost her twin. So maybe it's like, yeah, you fucked up, and that's what you get. You know, payment is replayed because you lost your brother. So we're good.
They're mad at Tony Stark because they were bombed just because we just accept the United States bombs countries. That's, whatever. But one of the munitions has Tony Stark's face on it. So for whatever reason, she directs her hatred not towards the government.
I'm pretty sure it has his name and not his face, but okay.
Yeah. Did I say face? That's great. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, so she sees Stark and she hates the weapons manufacturer, which is not the worst political position. It's a weird psychological thing to do, but fair enough. But it makes me think of the Dewey Cox's dad from Walk Hard, where it's like the wrong kid died. Quicksilver's so cool in this, and also coherent. And the visual effects are cool and bring something to the table that the team needs, which is a speedster. And I mean, power-wise, it's just really cool. And the reason I say Whedon's a douchebag, look, I understand you want Jean Grey to be in this movie, but she's not an X-Men, and I'm sorry, you can't. And that's what sucked about Scarlet Witch is that they managed to convolute her powers and attitude and character as in the span of 20 minutes, what it took the comics 35 years to do. And that's super annoying.
That's the most frustrating thing, because you read the comics and they don't understand her, or they constantly change her, and she's whatever the fuck they want her to be at the moment. And then you get a movie and you're like, okay, it's a movie. It's going to be a connected universe. She has to have some consistency. Nope. For some reason, this fucking character, they just can't not do that with. I don't understand. And Kayla brought up a good point that maybe if Quicksilver was still around, having that relationship might have helped her a bit. I mean, I know people still love her, but there's something about their relationship that is just so strong, and it plays well with each other.
Look, she controls people's minds and is a telekinetic in this, which is just not like her powers. Which, okay, fine, be inaccurate. What kills me is Deadpool 2 got it right, and that's it with Domino's powers. It bothers me so much. The whole idea behind Scarlet Witch was she does these hexes and she alters probabilities. So basically she points at shit and bad stuff happens. That is such a filmable, like, cinematic power that, again, they make fun of that Domino does so many times. So it's not only a missed opportunity, but it just feels like a profound lack of imagination. Sorry, anyway,
yeah.
rant over, but go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I think Joss Whedon is actually credited at saying that he didn't like how many like characters were in it. Like 11 characters, so that's how many were in this. Like 11 like Avengers are big characters, and I think he's like credited to say it's quite frankly too much. And it's like, well, that's how many there are. There's actually technically more in the comics. So like if you like, why did you introduce these characters? You know, it's just so weird. And I don't know if that played a part in like them killing Quicksilver off, but then to introduce like 7 more Avengers or however many more. I don't know. I just think this movie does have a lot of problems, but also it's kind of, it's interesting. It's different than the first one. I think it's different enough to be distinguished and to be liked, and not like the same thing over and over again. That's always the fear with sequels. But there are just some problems in this movie. Also, how the fuck are you going to kill a speedster with bullets?
Well, he does No, he does it to himself. So the idea is like let's say you can just create a scenario where he just barely got there in time, but he still what do you call it, like covered the distance of like 20 miles in 12 seconds or something like that. You know what I mean? Like you can save it where he's still very, very fast. But you know, it's like how the Flash can be late.
I know why he got shot. I'm just saying they wrote that. So it's like, yeah, he's real fast. He's supposed to be able, I mean, he was catching, Hawkeye's arrows when he was first introduced. So it's like, okay, you're fast. Like, why? Okay, that's fine. Die by bullets, whatever.
I have a mixed feeling about Whedon generally. I mean, I like him way more than I dislike him, but this also proves that when the parts where he's like not great, he's also full of shit. So what bothers me is like he kills Coulson, arguably because he's beloved and you need to bring the Avengers together. Okay, I don't think you needed to, but I buy that. Quicksilver doesn't need to die here at all. No. It doesn't forward the plot. It's at the end. Everything that it does almost nothing for the story, and it's super annoying because it's a character that was becoming compelling, would have had a really interesting life outside of this, and Whedon kills him because Whedon kind of likes killing people in his stories, and it just becomes annoying as a fan.
That's the thing. Like, I mean, this whole I've tried to read up on why they killed Quicksilver and then why he was in the X-Men movies, and there's no clear paper trail. So, like, I wouldn't necessarily say it's Whedon's fault. I mean, I know it's somebody's fault because
you're saying there's like a broader production reason, like maybe...
Yeah,
okay.
Because they couldn't have Quicksilver in both of them, and just like with what happened with this last X-Men movie, how those aliens were actually supposed to be the Skrulls, but, Marvel was like, no, we're using those for Captain Marvel, you can't use them, so they had to change the entire movie, which probably hurt them and made that movie flop like it did. So, I mean, I don't know the broader picture. I just think it's really weird that they, like you said, I mean, they introduced this character and he was becoming compelling. It was something different. They needed a different type of power set, different personality in general.
Yeah.
And
Pietro would have been so good in the Avengers. Like, they don't really have that many dicks. I know that's weird, but like, Like having an asshole can do a lot for a story, especially to like spice up some internal dynamics. And their one like I'm better than all of you guy gets kind of like shot. But it's fine.
Also, I feel like Scarlet Witch's accent went away because I forgot how heavy it was in Age of Ultron, and I feel as it went on, it kind of just disappeared.
They also like. If they could be like where Scandinavians sound American, they're so good at English speaking.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Fair enough.
That's also her superpower. She could change her accent whenever she wants, apparently. I don't know.
But yeah, that's the ninth dumbest thing about this character. Anyway, I agree with Kayla. Ultron is a huge success, though. I mean, as a character, I think that James Spader knocks it out of the park.
Yeah, I really like watching him work. Ultron is hilarious. Terrifying at the same time, which I think is what he needs to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're introduced to Vision in this one, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And then I guess one last thing before we wrap this up and go on to Ant-Man, because I feel like it won't be that long that we'll talk about Ant-Man, is I also forgot about how weird they were with Black Widow and Bruce's relationship. Because there's that weird, like, at the house party thing where she's like, should I be with you or shouldn't I? Like, you tell me. And I was like, wait, I forgot that happened. And then it just goes away. Like, it was this whole weird flirty will they, won't they thing. Yeah. And then it just disappears. Which part of me was like...
remember Black Widow and Hulk's relationship because it's stupid and badly done and makes no sense. And I blame that completely.
Yeah.
I forgot about it because, it's been years since I had really, I guess, thought about it or they've really interacted together because, after this, they kind of just went away. So I don't know. It was so weird. I forgot they did that. I was like, ew, gross. Stop it.
Yeah, it is gross. And it's gross enough that Tony Stark actually says at one point in this movie, I hope you guys aren't playing hide the zucchini. You guys get it? Like he's got a big green dick, and and he made.
I never got that until now.
Well, what's crazy is that Joss Whedon isn't reacting to circumstances. He created those circumstances. Like
that's true.
And look, there's honestly like Joss Whedon. The reason he's gotten dragged online a lot is because he presented himself originally as one of these sort of woke warriors, and it turns out if you look at a lot of what he's written and some of the other stuff he said, Joss Whedon also has a pretty virulent sexist side. Not least of which needing to ship what do you call it? Black Widow. In the first place, needing her to be in some sort of romantic relationship. It's like you have
that's not her. That's not the character,
and it's not. And it also doesn't make sense for those two.
There. Clinton.
No, you're absolutely right. But not away from just picking the right person. It's sort of like, it would have been good if they allowed her to stand as an independent woman in this ensemble cast. And like you mentioned, why what do they have to do with one another? Like. I guess there's this like we're both secretly monsters, but man, you got to really stretch to get that like the nuclear.
Well, and that's actually super offensive too. The fact that Black Widow calls herself a monster because she can't have children. What sort of message is that?
No. I think she meant more. I mean, that's a good point, but I think she meant more.
It was in the same breath, though.
You're right. They weren't careful enough to avoid it. I mean, I think that if you asked Whedon, the idea is like, no, because she's a murderous assassin who's done awful things. But you're right. You're right. You're absolutely right.
Sterile. I'm a monster too.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
That's also not a reason that two people that can't have kids should get together. It's like, oh, we can't have kids. Let's get together. It's like, okay, I don't know how that works. Okay, anyway, moving on. I will say, though, one more thing. I think the shots of, like, all of them together, like the first one in the beginning of them in the snowy woods, like, coming together and then continuing the action, really cool. And then when they're all fighting Ultron in that rotunda type thing, also really cool.
Yeah, action set pieces are real good. Yeah. This movie is fun to watch in that sense. I like to watch the Avenger fights in this.
Okay, and then the next one that I really just don't care about is Ant-Man.
Inexplicably, Noah doesn't like this movie, but maybe there's some reason for that. Anyway, so if you're aware, Paul,
I have reasons.
No, okay, but the reason, the intensity, I've never understood. But anyway, we'll find out. So Paul Rudd plays Scott Lang, a sort of ex-con who's a electrical, mastermind and engineer and also a thief. So he can't get it together in his life as an ex-con. Even at Baskin Robbins, he's barely getting by. And so he does one last sort of gig so he can takes a thieving job. I don't know what you call it, but anyway. And he breaks into Hank Pym, the original Ant-Man's sort of house, and escapes with the Ant-Man suit, only to be sort of caught by the cops. And this, so it's a failed attempt, but he does demonstrate the skill enough that Hank Pym notices him and wants to recruit him to be this generation's Ant-Man, so he can stop Darren Cross, who will be the Yellow Jacket, from using Pym technology and selling it to Hydra. So this is honestly, I think it's pretty fun. And in terms of genre change, it has very much a heist feel to it, very much like a kind of Great Escape kind of movie, and it's unapologetically funny in an appropriate way. In other words, the stakes are usually relatively low. The jokes are well timed, and Paul Rudd is pretty charming. I will say, I don't know. It's really cool that Marvel, it was almost like they were flexing, where they're like, we can take a dumbass character like Ant-Man and make a blockbuster. And I like Ant-Man, don't get me wrong. I love him, especially as a kind of B character. But I'm just saying,
I would have never thought they would have made an Ant-Man movie.
And this is the one, exactly. Guardians, if you've read that series and that world, you're like, oh my God, it would be amazing if they made this movie. But, you're skeptical they ever would. In this case, even if you're an Ant-Man fan, I don't know that this was the best choice. I have no criticism for this movie, really, outside of, again, I don't think Darren Cross is a particularly compelling villain. He's fine. The actor, I think, does a good job with it, but I don't think anybody's really clamoring for a Yellow Jacket return, Yeah,
I really liked. I mean, I love Paul Rudd, and I think her name's Evangeline Lilly, the one that plays Hope Van Dyne. She's she's amazing. Like, I think the cast is great, and it was funny. It just didn't, for me, it just didn't do anything. Like, it was like, oh, okay, it was entertaining, and that's, I guess, the least I could expect from, a superhero movie. But it's more of the character, and kind of what you had touched on. It was like, well, is this necessary in a way? Like, I know in the bigger picture, they needed the Pym particles to travel through time and everything. I know why it's necessary, but I don't know. It's just the character itself of the movie. It was like, okay, that was okay. I always forget about it, is the thing. And then when I look at the broader picture of, movies that were made, I'm like, that's really weird. They made an Ant-Man movie, and then they made a sequel. Now, I like the sequel much more than the first one. So, but Paul Rudd's cool, I guess. He's funny.
I agree with everything Jared said. I feel like it doesn't do anything wrong. I think it's really charming. The relationship between Scott and his daughter is really cute, and they sold me on the romance between Scott and Hope in a way that actually I don't think they really did for me with Peter Quill and Gamora, if I'm honest.
Yeah, agreed.
Everything just felt a little bit more, I don't know, just sincere and earnest. It does suffer, I believe, in a way that Guardians doesn't, where it doesn't really tie to the larger universe. I'm not sure how they would have done that, honestly. I mean, like, I feel like it was kind of like Guardians, where like check across the board. The humor was good. I found the characters really charming. The relationships, again, like in my opinion, were a little bit more well written. They took their time. I felt like everything was just a little bit more sincere and earnest. But yeah, I mean, I feel like Ant-Man was a pretty solid movie. It's definitely not one of my favorites because he's not one of my favorite characters. But I don't feel like, I don't think it deserves any heat other than the fact that it's not really tied to the rest of the universe. But I felt like it was a good movie.
I wouldn't say it's bad. Well, I wouldn't say it's like super bad or anything. It's just, it's one that's like, okay, it exists. I'll never watch this again. I understand the importance of him later on. I love the visual in Endgame with him being gigantic and running across the big battlefield. That's cool. I appreciate that. Like, I'm glad an Ant-Man movie was made just to see that. But, like, I mean, kind of what you said. It's just like, it checked all the boxes. It's really nothing super special, at least not for me. So it's just a blockbuster.
The size changing stuff, though, is super cool. And
yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah, and it opened up the microverse for Marvel, which obviously they used a little bit in Endgame, which was really cool. More in a kind of like causal mechanism than a really cool like landscape of world. But it was, I have to admit, visually, Doctor Strange is kind of outdo the psychedelicness of this in the later phase. But I have to admit, when he goes down to the microverse, and I was like, God damn, this is like, I'm tripping on fucking Ant-Man acid right now. This is insane. And I have to say, I think it's kind of cool that they carved out this level, this territory a little bit, where they're like, we're going to do small movies too. No pun intended. Seriously. Like they're like, we're going to do stuff that's not just gigantic epic, which is going to be kind of a solid story. And it's going to have its own little cool boutique motifs and stuff like that. So I'm glad that they were willing to not always have to like be so grandiose and big. And they were like, we're just going to tell this really cool story about a guy trying to make it who's got a generally cool attitude.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's all you could really ask for a movie. Yeah. Yeah, so that was pretty much our kind of speedy Marvel Phase 2. I'm worried about when we do Marvel Phase 3. I think we might have to split it into 2 parts because that movie or that phase has a shit ton of stuff in it.
Yeah, we will, because I agree. It's like it has more movies. It has more, I think, more than twice of the first one, the first phase.
Yeah. Yeah, it has a lot, and a lot of new characters are introduced. I mean, that's really it, guys. I mean, I like Phase 2 personally over the first one much more than the first one. Phase 3 is my favorite, though.
This is my least favorite phase, but I don't dislike it at all. I don't.
That's confusing. Okay. All right. Well. Man,
you're gonna have to start saying "you're welcome" now.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, bye. Why did I just say bye? Like I'm getting okay. Anyway, bye.
Thanks for listening. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at The Phantom Zone Pod for more podcast updates.